the entire agreement is about removing red tape, while at the same time reserving the right to protect the needs of the different provinces, okay? And you gotta ask yourself why they wanna get rid of that, especially when some of those needs could really affect you, could really upset the apple cart. All right, welcome to the Golden Belt Buckle Podcast. We're gonna slow it down a little bit today because we're gonna talk about the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, and we're gonna talk about this recent announcement by Doug Ford saying Ontario is removing interprovincial barriers for workers in regulated professions, allowing them greater mobility when searching for work across the country, the province said Monday. So this caught my attention because I've been reading a lot about the federal government and how they removed all their exceptions from the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, and they're encouraging the provinces to do the same. So when I first saw this, I was wondering, how does this connect? What's that got to do with it? And if you go to Section 7 of the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, it talks about making it easier for workers with certifications in other provinces to do work in other provinces. The whole thing is about removing barriers, right? So if there's a barrier that doesn't need to be there, if there's a way to bring the regulations in harmony, the provinces are bound by goodwill, bound by this treaty to try and remove all of those regulations to make things more harmonious. So essentially, that's obviously been done because that's what led to this announcement. So this announcement is basically our free trade agreement. That's it working. That's the agreement being put into force. This is different than what the federal government did. They got rid of all their exemptions off the back end of it. So we're going to go into this free trade agreement here, and we'll make more sense. We'll talk about what it is, and all right. So we're going to talk about what it is here. In December 2014, federal, provincial, and territorial governments began negotiations to strengthen and modernize the agreement on internal trade. They were guided by direction from the premiers and the federal government to secure an ambitious, balanced, and equitable agreement that would level the playing field for trade and investment in Canada. The new Canadian Free Trade Agreement resulted from these negotiations entering into force on July 1st, 2017. It commits governments to a comprehensive set of rules that will help achieve a modern and competitive union for all Canadians. I will go over to the preamble. The governments of Canada, Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Manitoba, British Columbia, Prince Edward Island, Saskatchewan, Alberta, Newfoundland and Labrador, the Northwest Territories, Yukon, and Nunavut resolve to promote an open, efficient, and stable domestic market for long-term job creation, economic growth, and stability, reduce and eliminate to the extent possible barriers to the free movement of persons, goods, services, and investments within Canada, promote equal economic opportunity for Canadians, enhance competitiveness of Canadian business, promote sustainable and environmentally sound development, consult on matters related to trade, investment, and labor within Canada, recognizing the diverse social, cultural, and economic characteristics of the provinces, respecting the legislative authorities of Parliament of Canada and the provincial legislatures under the Constitution of Canada, confirming that this agreement represents a mutually agreed balance of the parties' rights and obligations. So the reason why I find this fascinating, because when I was listening to the federal government talk about what they've done, right? We've removed these barriers. We want to get rid of all the barriers to provincial trade, and look at, we're taking the lead. We're getting rid of all of our exceptions. We're getting rid of, 53 of them. We're getting rid of the remaining exceptions. To the average person, you would think Canada's just closed for business. You'd think every province is just like, there's so many barriers to doing any kind of trade between the provinces that it's almost impossible, and it's just not true. Right? It's as if there's been no work going on within the provinces to try and make trade easier, right? The stats can I read the other day, and I wish this was me that pointed this out. I was just reading another article, said the three biggest barriers to provincial trade last year. So like before the federal government removed all the remaining of their exemptions, the biggest barrier was distance. So the biggest barrier is distance. The time you order your supplies to the time you get your supplies. And the last one, I can't remember the last one, but it was related to the first two, right? It's basically, it was all transportation related, right? The costs of transportation. But you'd think that, you would think it had nothing to do with that. It was just all, nobody's working together, but that's not really true. The entire point of the free trade agreement is to get rid of all the red tape. Any red tape that doesn't really need to be there. That's kind of the point. So within that framework though, actually let me back up. If there is red tape, so if your profession is not, if you need to be recertified in another province, under this agreement, that's only supposed to be the case if there's such a difference in your certificate of training that would make you, the language, materially deficient in the province you're trying to get the work in. In other words, if they don't recognize your credentials, it's not that they're necessarily trying to keep you out. It's that your credentials aren't good enough to actually be there. That's why I'm not really too sure about, was it the mutual agreements, coming up to a mutual agreement? I mean, that's way above my head. It's above my pay grade, right? I don't make those decisions, but just in principle, the idea of mutual agreements to accept everybody's credentials doesn't seem like a very good idea. But again, that's over my head. That's above my pay grade. So the whole point is to remove the barriers. And now within that, however, there are exemptions. And some of these exemptions, from what I can see, they're based on certain industry protection, okay? Preserving the local economies, preserving local culture. Tax, it's got to do with taxes. It's got to do with job loss and shuffling, just the disturbances that you would cause a community. So if you just got rid of all these exemptions, and that's, I think, maybe where the devil's in the details, and you might want to an extent, I agree with getting rid of any barrier that doesn't need to be there, but by the same token, you got to think about a couple of things before you just getting rid of them. Quebec, for example, they have heavy haul vehicle registration for out-of-province bulk carriers. Well, that's tax revenue, right? All timber harvested in Quebec, it needs to be processed in Quebec. Well, you've got people who are harvesting the timber. You've got the truck drivers bringing it to the processing center or the mill. I think, was that what you would call it, a mill? You've got them bringing it there, and then you've got all the workers. You've got the factories, right? So if you just this is one of Quebec's exemptions, okay? These exemptions. If Quebec gave up the rights, if they just stopped making people come out from out of province get their permits, if they would lose taxes. If they just allowed other provinces to come in, or if they allowed the timber harvesting companies to just take the timber wherever they want, well, you have to be prepared that they're going to look for a lower price. They could possibly go to another province to get their timber processed, right? Which could mean a lot of job losses, right? Job reshuffling. We already talked about in a couple videos ago, Ontario's lost 38,000 jobs. I just saw a plant in Chatham lose it was a steel plant, lost half of its production to the States. Same thing with Amherstburg. They just lost a bottling company. The Crown Whiskey just left. They're moving their bottling south. I'm going to guess it's somewhere toward Texas because they said they want to be near their American customers. That's where the majority of their customers are, I was reading. So probably somewhere down there, more direct line to Texas. I don't know. But that's what happens if you deregulate it. You have to be okay with the possibility of losing your stability. If you're a trucking company and you've been hauling to and from the work site, timber to and from the work site, well, maybe you won't have a job, right? Or maybe your entire job description will change. You got to haul it somewhere else, further away than you want to, right? So another example, Nova Scotia. You got protectionism here. If you want to become a bus driver in Nova Scotia, they have a needs test they apply, and the competition is very limited. Again, if anybody could just go open up their own busing company, or I'm assuming taxis as well, like any, well, is this going to be a race to the bottom, right? Obviously, prices are going to drop, right? And it's not just their. The more competition you have, the lower the prices are going to be, which means to anyone offering the service, probably laborers, your wages are going to go down, right? That's what truckers see, right? Our wages go down, right? The market gets flooded with temporary foreign workers, and not only are they dangerous, but there's a lot of competition, which drives our wages down. So you've got industry protectionism, you got, there's protection for the local economy. Provincial governments want to keep stability in their communities. And I'm going to give you another example here. I think this is a good one. This is Nunavut. I think this is Nunavut. I'm going to read you both. One from Nunavut, one from Northwest Territories. In the allocation of a dealer's license, guiding license, fur farm license, game farm license, tanning license, or taxidermy license, preference shall be given to an applicant who has made his or her principal residence in the Nunavut settlement for at least 18 continuous months prior to the submission of his or her application. Preferences will also be given to applications that likely provide direct benefits to the Nunavut economy, in particular through employment of local human or economic resources. So what you have, Nunavut's government is trying to protect Nunavut's people. And then the question would be, well, apart from the wages and all that sort of stuff, competition, why does the federal government want Nunavut to stop looking out for its own citizens, right? Why does the federal government not want preference to be given to people who will be most likely to provide direct benefits to the Nunavut economy? Why would you want to get rid of that, right? Why would Nunavut want to get rid of that? But more importantly, why would the federal government want to get rid of that? It's just something you got to think about. I'm not saying it's good or bad, right? And this one's Northwest Territories. The minister must approve. This is in reference to energy. The minister must approve or waive the requirement for a benefits plan for the employment of Canadians and for providing Canadian manufacturers, consultants, contractors, and service companies with a full and fair opportunity to participate on a competitive basis in the supply of goods and services used in a proposed work or activity referred to in the benefits plan. A benefit plan may be required to include provisions to ensure that disadvantaged natural persons or groups have access to training and employment opportunities, and to enable those natural persons or groups or corporations owned or cooperatives operated by them to participate in the supply of goods and services used in the proposed work or activity referred to in the benefits plan. Now what's the point? Again, remember, these are exemptions. Despite the fact that the Canadian Free Trade Agreement aims to level the playing field, get rid of any useless regulation that's hindering provincial trade, they have reserved the right on a few of these issues to say, no, this isn't subject to this plan. Well, again, here's another question. If you're in the Northwest Territories, if you're a resident there, you should ask yourself, why does the federal government not want the minister of Nunavut to have the privilege of requiring a benefits plan for the employment of Canadians and for providing Canadian manufacturers, consultants, and contractors with a full and fair opportunity to participate in competitive basis in the supply of goods and services? Why wouldn't you want that? Why do you want that exemption gone, right? Why do you want that opened up, right? You got to ask yourself that. If you're living in Northwest Territories, does it sound like the federal government has Canadians in mind when they want to get rid of an exemption that would protect Canadians? It's just a question, right? Again, I can't say it's right or I can't say it's wrong. I'm just saying it's something you got to ask yourself. So let's see if there's, anyway. So yeah, I think that's my last slide here. But that's the whole thing you got to consider. There's a lot being done to take out all of the unnecessary regulations. There's a lot being done. Actually, the fact that right now, I just read several articles, talking about all the different hidden barriers to interprovincial trade. I just got done reading a whole bunch of articles on that, right? And they want to, they seem like they're talking bad about this agreement. Like this agreement, I don't know if they just mean, if they're talking like they got a problem with the exemptions or just the agreement in itself. And just the vibe I'm getting from what I'm reading. And really, when I see all this conversation about removing this or that barrier to interprovincial trade, to me, that just seems like that's exactly what this agreement was designed to do, was to allow for conversation, was to obligate provincial premiers to work together, right? It seems like that's the whole point, is to obligate them to work together to get rid of these hidden regulations or barriers, and even to be held account if they don't look like they're playing in good faith. In fact, there's an entire section on how disputes are to be arbitrated. So when I'm reading about, the federal government talking about, or when you're reading about it, just realize there's real consequences. What Doug Ford did, he worked, from what I could see, his opening up Ontario to 50 more professional jobs, professional careers. That was in harmony with this entire agreement. And even the federal government getting rid of their exemptions was in harmony with it. You're allowed to do that. But I'm saying they did two different things. They didn't do the same exact thing. All right, Doug Ford didn't do what the Prime Minister did. In fact, I don't even think Ontario has any exemptions. From what I can see in here, I looked for them, I couldn't find any. But they're different things. And just don't be thinking, if you're like me, you're generally, you're not interested in, you like nerding out a little bit, but you're not making your whole life about it. Look a little bit deeper into what politicians are doing, because they really would have you think no one has been doing anything until they came along, and now they're removing all the red tape, when that's just not true. The entire agreement is about removing red tape, while at the same time reserving the right to protect the needs of the different provinces. Okay? And you got to ask yourself why they want to get rid of that, especially when some of those needs could really affect you, could really upset the apple cart, so anyway, that's all I got. If you like the content, then do me a favor, like and subscribe. I really appreciate it, and I do my best to make sure everything I'm saying is factual. If I get it wrong, whatever, let me know in the comments. Let me know what you think. Anyway, cheers. Keep the rubber side down.